Hi, I'm Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. And I know it's hard to believe Mint can be any good for just $15 a month. So let's ask Wasim Iknabi, one of Mint's first customers, if he has any issues with Mint.
No, the service has been great.
And under my ownership, it's going to get even better.
How?
No clue.
Still $15 a month though, right?
Yep. To learn more and see our logo, go to mintmobile.com/Spotify.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something. Music.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.
The following podcast includes explicit language, including, well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of April 3rd, 2023. On this week's show, the Athletic's Sabrina Merchant will join us to talk about LSU beating Iowa in the women's NCAA final and all that transpired on and off the court. Matija Pecotic will also be here to tell the amazing story of how he went from a 33-year-old real estate developer to a winner at the top level of men's professional tennis. And Jody Avirgan, host of the new podcast Good Sport, will join for a conversation about what the sports TV debate shows have wrought on American culture. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Joel Anderson is busy working on Slow Burn Season 8, Becoming Justice Thomas, but I'm sure he'd want me to tell you how proud he was of LSU on Sunday. Also in D.C., Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside, and the host and organizer of the North American School Scrabble Championship, which just went off at the Planet Word Museum here in D.C. How'd it go, Stefan?
Oh, it was great. My favorite weekend of the year. And I say that, when there's so many great weekends to celebrate in the sports world. We had 110 kids from around the country. Played 8 games apiece in one room. The whole thing was live streamed. I'm going to post a link to the live stream on our show page. Our champions, I'm going to shout them out. Nathaniel Campos, 7th grade from Ridgefield, Connecticut. Walden Giesentanner, 8th grade. Webster Groves, Missouri. They defeated my own team, Milo Anderson, 7th grade. Washington, D.C. And Nathan Lerlop, 6th grade. Herndon, Virginia. That was in the elementary and middle school division. Then there was a high school division winner, Ruth Lee, 12th grade, Toronto. She ran the table, 9-0, dominant performance. Runner-up, awesome player, James Donnelly, 12th grader from Hingham, Mass. Highlight of the weekend. Great words were played. Children had fun. I had fun. Highlight of the weekend personally, though, Josh, 110 kids singing happy birthday to me in the playing room.
Happy birthday to you, and congratulations to all the winners. That's great. You might have noticed, Stefan, in the rundown at the top of the show that we did not mention the men's tournament. We're recording this on Monday before the final between UConn and San Diego State. And what can I say? Equality of opportunity doesn't mean equality of outcome. So the men, you got to have a better tournament if you want us to give you equal time with the women.
And you
but
got to
that buzzer beater,
better. They're not scheduling this tournament to suit our needs, Josh.
The buzzer beater on Saturday by San Diego State was amazing and was the first Final Four buzzer beater ever that took a team from losing to winning. And the conversation about it after, Stefan, was that Lamont Butler, the player who made the winning shot, was not encumbered by a timeout. The San Diego State coach, Brian Dutcher, let his team play. He joked that it was because he'd run out of plays, but I think the actual reason was that he thought his team would potentially be in an advantage if they were allowed to attack in the open court, which turned out just as he hoped it would.
Yeah, it was, and I loved his explanation because it wasn't just random, I think these guys can do it. It was also There was a 7-second differential between the shot clock and the game clock. You get 1 dribble per second if you're going up the floor. So he mathematically sort of calculated what possibly could happen and why Butler should be able to get off a shot. And this had basically happened a few weeks ago. So this is an example of a coach trusting his players and not over-coaching and allowing the game to flow. And what a great thing we got to see, because a coach let the game be dictated by the guys on the court and not by his whiteboard.
And this is an example of an outcome kind of supporting our beliefs and philosophy. Like, we want this to be what happened. We want the coach letting the players play and like this, because we like it when the players do things and the coaches sit back. There's so many ways in which this could have gone wrong. There wasn't that much time on the clock. Everything had to go exactly right. There had to be enough time. They had to get the rebound cleanly. They had to be able to get the outlet pass cleanly. He didn't have his best offensive lineup on the floor, so definitely could have been criticized for that. But sometimes the narrative supports, and the fairy tale ending is exactly the ending that we want to have. So thank you to the gods of basketball. In our Slate Plus segment this week, Sabrina Merchant, who we're going to hear from in just one moment, is going to stick around to talk about a bunch more women's basketball stuff that we don't get to. Kim Mulkey and her greatness and also non-greatness, and then also why so many players in women's college basketball are sticking around and playing in the sport for so many years. To hear that conversation, you need to be a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments like the one I just described. You also get ad-free shows, and you get to support us, which is a nice thing to do. So thank you to those who do it. Slate.com/hangoutplus is the link to join. Slate.com/hangoutplus. A little more than a week ago, LSU beat Miami 56-42 in the Elite Eight in a game so full of missed shots that it led to speculation about overinflated balls, and Tigers coach Kim Mulkey saying she would have turned the game off if she was watching at home. On Sunday in Dallas, in the national title game against Iowa, LSU again had a 56-42 lead, but this time it was with the clock running down in the first half. And this time, as the buzzer sounded, reserve guard Jasmine Carson banked in a three-pointer to put her team up 59-42 at the half. There'd be a lot of drama after that, both on the court and off, about the refs, and LSU's Angel Reese giving Iowa superstar Caitlin Clark the "you can't see me" gesture. But LSU would ultimately win 102-85 in a game I doubt anyone turned off, scoring the most points ever in a women's title game, and just one less than UNLV did, and thrashing Duke 103-73 in the 1990 men's final. Back with us this week is the Athletic's Sabrina Merchant, who is in Dallas and is a must-read on women's basketball. Sabrina, so glad to have you on the show again.
Yeah, hell of a game that we got to witness this weekend. 3 games, really. So happy to be here.
Your piece after the final was about Jasmine Carson, who came off the bench for LSU to score 21 in the first half, going 5 for 5 from 3, including that banker at the buzzer. An amazing fact you noted in your piece was that Carson set an all-time tournament record for points in a quarter with 16, eclipsing the record set by Caitlin Clark in the first quarter. What can you tell us about Carson and what her performance meant for LSU?
Yeah, one of the facts that I really liked about Jasmine Carson actually was that she hadn't scored in the 3 games leading up to the national final. She had been starting for most of the season for LSU. I think there was only 1 game all year where she'd come off the bench before the NCAA tournament. And yet after the first game of the tournament, Kim Mulkey made a switch, brought her off the bench. And yet, fifth-year senior who's played her entire season as a starter still had to go on off the bench when she needed to for the biggest game of the season, even after this 3-game slump where she hadn't managed to put up any points. You mentioned that LSU eclipsed their Miami score in the first half of this Iowa game. I think we all expected Iowa to put up some offensive fireworks. I don't think anybody expected LSU to have the capacity to match them in an offensive showdown. Not that they didn't have the ability to win, just that if they were to win, it would look more like an SEC game than a Big Ten game. And I think it was so interesting to see how LSU just had the horses that Iowa didn't. And Jasmine's obviously the number one of those. She comes off the bench. She has to play the full second quarter because Kateri pulls in foul trouble. And she has a very pretty jump shot. I'm kind of surprised that this girl hasn't made a shot in the last 3 games because it looks good every time it's going in. even that banker that she took at the buzzer that, ended up putting LSU by 17, the one that they celebrated as if they'd already won the national title. I think, the celebration was almost a little bit more muted in the fourth quarter than it was at halftime when they went out to, intermission. But yeah, she did exactly what you'd expect any spark plug to do, right? Like in a game like this, you expect your stars to show up. You expect Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark to show up. It's all about who's going to get that extra source of offense, that extra spark plug. And that was Jasmine Carson, and she was awesome and deservedly, making the most outstanding, the all tournament team, for the Final Four. Yeah, just one of those performances that is going to live on in lore, for LSU, the kind of thing where she'll never have to buy a drink in Baton Rouge again. So kudos to her, and just an awesome first half for her.
And the difference, really, right? I mean, like you said, you expect the starters to show up. Angel Reese had her 750th double-double. Caitlin Clark scored 30 more points after scoring 41 in the previous 2 tournament games. And the difference seemed to be that LSU made their shots. This is a team that shot 65% from 3 in the final versus 20% through the first 5 games of the tournament. And you need that that unexpected performance to lead to what some people might have thought was an unexpected outcome. That was the difference.
Yeah, and I think it's so cool that you watched, Iowa versus South Carolina, and Iowa played South Carolina a certain way in that they were forcing their perimeter shooters to try to beat them from the outside. And the Gamecocks were just too scared to take most of those shots. They just looked completely uncomfortable and out of rhythm. And LSU, despite the fact, like you mentioned, that they had been shooting 20% from 3 during the tournament, had supreme confidence in their ability to take and make those shots, whether it was Jasmine Carson or Poole or Flau'jae Johnson or, a number of other Tigers. There was just such an incredibly strong sense of belief within this LSU team. Did not come from the outside world because a lot of the media were not expecting them to do very well in this tournament or, in the Final Four. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's so remarkable that a team that had been performing that well was so confident that when they saw the defense that Iowa was going to play against them, that they'd be able to use that space to their advantage and absolutely lived up to their word.
There are a couple of 3-pointers in the first half, one by Carson and one by last tier Poa, where if you look back at the replays, Iowa was not even trying to contest. It wasn't as kind of noticeable and remarkable as was against South Carolina, where at one point Caitlin Clark even dismissively waved at Raven Johnson, which we'll get into in a bit. But this was a strategy by Iowa. It worked in the semifinal. It did not work in the final. And clearly Iowa was a great team and was well coached. I was wondering if you thought that there was any kind of critique that could be made that they didn't adjust quickly enough against LSU. And I think actually there could be a critique made against Don Staley of South Carolina that they didn't adjust against Iowa. So I'm just wondering how you kind of thought the coaching played out in these games.
Yeah, so I'll start with South Carolina just because that game came first. It's so hard when you go 36-0 and you've won every single game with this group playing a certain style of defense to adjust on the fly, even if it is against a player like Caitlin Clark, who sort of demands that you break out an entirely new scheme. And I understand why Dawn felt the need to stick to her guns in terms of how they played against Caitlin Clark. I was surprised that they didn't make any adjustments defensively just because it did seem like it was a little too easy for Clark in that particular matchup. So
kind of a layup line for her.
Yeah, right. For her and for Monica Zanano. So it was surprising. And, this is a Dawn Staley who won the Naismith Coach of the Year award this year. And, universally regarded as one of the greatest coaches. She coached the Olympic team for Team USA. So it's not like she hasn't done obviously great things this season and throughout her career. It's just, you'd think that with all of the defensive talent at her disposal, there would be another option. And there just wasn't an option. It was the same looks, basically, even though there were different defenders at the point of attack, just the same coverages. And I was surprised by that. But I don't want to give Lisa Bluder more grace because I don't think that their defensive plan was great at all, but they didn't have as many options as South Carolina did. This is an Iowa team that has struggled defensively for most of the season. They played just good enough on defense to get the job done. Their, plan against South Carolina, that was a junk defense, and it worked because South Carolina's guards were just afraid to shoot. And I don't think that's a sustainable practice. You can't expect every team to be that uncomfortable taking jump shots because they're wide open jump shots, like you mentioned for last year Poa and Jasmine Carson. Even Kateri Poole with that wide open shot in the corner to start the game. It's just not going to work every time. But I don't know what Iowa was supposed to do because Caitlin Clark, not a great defender, kind of just roaming around most of the time. Gabby Marshall's kind of small. McKenna Warnock was in foul trouble. I understand that it didn't work, but at least there was like some theory behind it. Like LSU hadn't been shooting very well for most of the tournament. Even Jasmine Carson, a 33% 3-point shooter, like she far exceeded those numbers in this game in the national title. So it's not that I think Iowa shouldn't have adjusted. It's just I'm not sure if anything could have been done to make it better, because if you try to put more effort on the perimeter, then all of a sudden you're just subjecting yourself to the Angel Reese offensive rebound show, which was already a problem for the Hawkeyes in that game.
And before we get to the off-court stuff, we should talk about the other big storyline on the court, which was the referees. The game was plagued by referee involvement, 37 fouls. I think it was pretty evenly distributed. Was it 19 on Iowa and 18 on LSU? The main bone of contention was that they were calling fouls on the best players, including some things that looked unnecessary, including a technical foul against Caitlin Clark in the third quarter that was her fourth foul of the game.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the 37 fouls. I think that was 10 more than there had ever been in a women's national title game. So just a dramatic difference between what you usually expect in terms of, this stage. And like you said, it was even, right? Like Angel Reese sat the entire second quarter. Kateri Poole sat the entire second quarter for LSU. And on the other side, Clark picks up her third foul in the first half and so on and so forth. And it was just, there was that one stretch at the start of the second quarter where there were really no fouls called and both teams were trading the lead back and forth. And it was just this wonderful display of what two awesome teams can do when they're just allowed to play up and down basketball. Because even though LSU can do the grinded out SEC style, like they were one of the highest scoring teams in the country all season. Like this is the style of play that really works for them. And then of course we just got bogged down in more fouls, and the fact that Kim Mulkey was able to convince the refs to review a play that was like 20 seconds past. And that, of course, you saw the screenshots of, coaches on the court looked like spotting up for a wing three, honestly, instead of in the coach's box. I didn't think it was a particularly well officiated game, but both teams had to deal with it and LSU rose above it. And I think the Tigers just played well enough that it's a shame we have to talk about the refs, because they were so good in this game that I think they would have won regardless. It sucks that we have to talk about it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you think about South Carolina, Iowa, by contrast, being a game where after the game, all anyone was talking about was how wonderful it was, how wonderful Caitlin Clark was, how competitive it was. That was a game where Leah Boston sat for 15 minutes due to foul trouble. So it wasn't like it was unsullied by fouls, but that was just one player, and these things happen in games. This was a game where there's a horrible foul called on Angel Reese for her second foul. Mm-hmm. The technical against Caitlin Clark was unconscionable, and the explanation given afterwards was terrible, especially because in women's college basketball, a technical foul is also a personal foul. It just made absolutely no sense in that moment for the ref to make that decision. You could argue that if it didn't change the outcome of the game, it kind of ruin is a strong word, but it screwed up the game in like an appreciable way.
Yeah, because Iowa needed to come back, and they needed their best player to help them come back.
I mean, Monica Zanano was just elbowing people in the face all game long, so I thought some of the arguments about her specifically were a little bit wrong. But I think some of this stuff is structural. I think there should be 6 fouls in the game. I'm the only person who ever says this, but I don't think players should ever foul out. Like, I don't understand why individual fouls need to, like, they're penalties for fouls. The other team gets to shoot free throws. Like, that seems like enough to me. And like, this is an entertainment product. Everybody wanted to watch Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese and everyone else. It ruined the game as a piece of entertainment, and it seems fixable to me. So I don't know why, Sabrina, we need to, we shouldn't just sit here and accept this. We need to change things.
I 100% agree that there should not be foul outs. You're right. There's a penalty, and it gets like more and more onerous the further you get into the bonus. Like it just stops the game, and it's annoying, and like teams don't want to commit fouls. So yeah, I don't see the need to have foul outs. Like, I mean, the fact that you can have 10 fouls in NBA Summer League suggests that we don't really need to like set a hard number. It can just keep going up and up.
I agree. So let's talk about the conversation that everyone has been having the last 24 hours. There's a question about where it started and how it started and when it started, but the iconic image at the time that I watched it this morning, SportsCenter shared a video of it that had 14 million views on Twitter of Angel Reese doing the pro wrestling John Cena "you can't see me" gesture and pointing to her ring finger at Caitlin Clark after the game, mimicking Caitlin Clark's "you can't see me" gesture. Again, we can debate who started it and why it happened, but I'm just curious, Sabrina, kind of in the arena among the journalists who were there, what was the conversation like, and has it been like post game?
Well, first of all, I absolutely love it. I think Angel Reese is an A-grade trash talker. When she got that second foul on Monica Sonata, she flashed the peace sign because she knew that she had 2 fouls. And like when Caitlin picked up her 4th, like the 4 was coming too. Caitlin, obviously a big trash talker. She was trash talking Haley Van Lith to no avail during the Elite Eight game. I think it was a little bit more measured during the South Carolina game because, they just weren't sure about the outcome of that one. But like you mentioned, she did do the dismissive shrug to Raven Johnson when she was sitting at the 3-point line, with that wide open pocket of space. So these are 2 players who love to have fun, who love to rile up the crowd, who love to rile up their opponents and their teammates and just enjoy the emotion of the game alongside the actual basketball part of it. So I thought it was awesome. I mean, the ring thing that Bob Starkey has at LSU where they drew the rings on and like waiting for the time when they would actually get their own championship rings, I thought was such a cool motivational thing that they did at LSU. And I mean, Angel Reese had an awesome game, right? Awesome Final Four, great tournament, most outstanding player, deservedly enjoying her moment. I thought it was great. I think most of the media were in agreement, like in the building, that this is something that Caitlin Clark has dished out and she better be ready to receive. And I thought she did. Like there were no extra fireworks or anything related to that. The conversation, obviously awful, like outside of Dallas and on the internet, took a different tenor and is definitely racially biased towards Caitlin Clark over Angel Reese, where Caitlin Clark as a white woman is allowed to express her emotions in a way that Angel Reese is not. And it just got very ugly and dismissive towards Angel. And I thought that was just so disappointing that this, young woman who had one of the greatest nights of her life probably and performed so well on the greatest stage of college basketball had to deal with this nonsense, because everybody should be able to talk trash, men's, women's, white players, black players, like it's all the same. And I thought that I didn't think she did anything that was over the line by any means. She just did exactly what Caitlin Clark had already done to another player. So I thought Angel was awesome. I thought it was just super cool that we're at this point where female players feel comfortable enough to express themselves like that during the course of a basketball game, even if a lot of the world isn't ready for them to do that. I hope that we're getting closer to that point, because I just think it's great for basketball to have this little extra, beef almost when it comes to college athletes and our stars.
Stefan, before you jump in, let's listen to what Angel Reese said after the game.
I'm happy. I mean, all year I was critiqued about who I was. The narrative, I don't fit the narrative. I don't fit in the box that y'all want me to be in. I'm too hood, I'm too ghetto. Y'all told me that all year. But when other people do it, y'all don't say nothing. So this was for the girls that look like me, that's going to speak up on what they believe in. It's unapologetically you. And that's what I did it for tonight. This was for it was just bigger than me tonight. It was bigger than me. Twitter is going to go in a rage every time. And I mean, I'm happy. I feel like I've helped grow women's basketball this year. I'm super happy and excited. So I'm looking forward to celebrating in the next season.
She has helped grow women's basketball enormously, and so has Caitlin Clark, and so has Paige Beckers, and so has Aaliyah Boston. And having athletes who are known not just for how many points they score, but for their personalities and what they're doing off the court and how much NIL money they're generating, this is all tremendous for the game. What I would love to know a little bit more about from last night's game was whether this was a two-way street. Was there some real genuine back and forth between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese? Because, most of the outrage was directed at the fact that Reese seemed to be chasing Caitlin Clark around the court after the game was basically done to shove it in her face. So I didn't get the sense of whether there was reciprocal beef, and I'm not sure that should matter. But, that is one of the questions that I think people, I would love to know, because I think that also is good for understanding the narrative of this particular game.
It's a lot harder to talk trash when you're down by 17. And I understand that Caitlin had her own emotional outrage towards the referees instead of Angel Reese in that particular moment.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that this came after the game, which is a moment when there's this ritual in many sports, most sports, of like doing the handshake line and good game, good game, good game, good game, in either a genuine or perfunctory way. And that's not what Angel Reese did in that moment. And so I think there was a difference between Caitlin Clark or, doing it in the heat of battle and Angel Reese maybe doing it after the game.
Right.
And look, when somebody like Draymond Green or whoever talks trash, some people love it and some people hate it. And so that's, I think, Angel Reese knows that better than anyone, that some people are going to love her and some people are going to hate her. I think the thing that she is pointing out and needs to be pointed out, and that you pointed out, Sabrina, is like, look at women's college basketball. Who are the players that get the most attention? There's Caitlin Clark, who obviously deserves it. Haley Van Lith, the Cavender twins, Sabrina Ionescu. It's the Bird and Taurasi show. And Angel Reese has become one of those people. And this is what she's had to do. This is what, as a Black player in this sport, you have to do to get this level of attention. If Angel Reese just went out like Aaliyah Boston did and put up her double-doubles every game and did what she did, nobody outside of fans of the sport would have any idea who she was.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's just a huge difference in the way the players are marketed. There's a huge difference in the way that they're covered, and a huge difference in the way brands perceive them and their ability to, sell their products. And I think it's awesome that Angel Reese has found herself at LSU. She's so much more confident and willing to be, embracing all aspects of her personality than she was at Maryland. The fact that she, brought out the crown during introductions and was carrying it with her, all throughout post game. Like, the Bayou Barbie is just fantastic marketing. I'm really proud of whoever came up with that. And she just exemplifies all of the good sparkle that you would want from LSU.
And the nice thing here is that both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are coming back for one more year of college basketball.
At least.
This is tremendous. At least this is tremendous marketing for the sport at a time where, they should be, the NCAA should be, when they renegotiate their television contracts, should be demanding an enormous amount of money. This was a breakthrough year for this sport. And a lot of that is due to the players who agitated for change because of the disparities between how the men and the women were treated. This is the first year that the women's tournament was marketed as March Madness. This is the first year that the women, after, again, lobbying for equal treatment, got it at the Final Four. So the progression here is terrific. I mean, what else can you see, Sabrina, going forward that will help to even improve and equalize the tournaments even more? This has been a better women's tournament than men's tournament, arguably.
Yeah, I think the first thing you said about the TV contract, currently the women's tournament is bundled with all of the other NCAA sports, excluding men's basketball and football, when they sell it for a TV package. So it comes with softball and gymnastics and every other possible sport you could think of. And I think we're realizing, over 6 million people, I think at their peak, watched that Iowa-South Carolina game on Friday. There's a real market just for this particular 63 games of basketball. And, now that ESPN has put it on their family of networks for everybody to watch every game, we're just seeing the numbers continue to rise. And the fact that we have such powerful, capable talents like Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark and Leah Boston, who are just so good to watch and carrying the game forward. I can't wait to see what they're able to do with that deal. And we're already hearing Charlie Baker express some pretty ambitious numbers for what's going to happen when the new contract comes up in a year. I also think just changing it so that women's basketball programs get the units for how far they advance in the tournament. Like on the men's side, if Clemson, advances to the second round, they get a certain amount of money that comes back towards the ACC. And so conferences are able to put that money back into their schools' budgets. And that just doesn't exist on the women's side. So the Big Ten had their best year of getting 3 teams to the Elite Eight and 1 to the Final Four. The first time a Big Ten team has made the Final Four since 2015. And they don't really get to benefit off of it because that money doesn't come back to the schools. So I think just restructuring the payouts, for the teams in the tournament, making sure that the tournament is packaged and sold to TV networks at a reasonable number instead of the highly, highly devalued number that it's at right now. That all just helps put more money into the programs and, adds just more exposure to what is just a really, really great product.
And if anybody knows what's good for them or good for the sport. We're going to see Iowa versus LSU in the regular season next year on ABC. Sabrina Merchant writes about women's basketball for The Athletic. Thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, Matija Pecotic on the greatest comeback story in tennis. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. You work hard for your money, so you should be able to spend it on the things you actually want. With Apple Card, you can kiss fees goodbye. There aren't and never will be any annual, foreign transaction, late, or over-the-limit fees, not even hidden ones. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval, late or missed payments will result in additional interest accumulating toward your balance. Variable APRs for Apple Card range from 15.49% to 26.49% based on credit worthiness. Rates as of March 1st, 2023. Before February, 33-year-old Matija Pecotic had never won a match at the top level of men's pro tennis. He also pretty much stopped trying. He had a full-time job as a real estate developer in Florida, which left him little time for high-level training. But the Delray Beach Open wasn't too far from his house, so he signed in as an alternate, which meant that if enough players pulled out or didn't show up, he'd get a place in the qualifying rounds, which would then give him a chance to play his way into the main draw. Here to tell us about what happened next is Matija Pecotic. He's a graduate of the world's greatest sports powerhouse and Stefan's favorite school, Princeton University. And as you're about to hear, he's got an amazing story that's been picked up in media around the world. Matija, thanks so much for being here.
Good morning, guys. Good to be here with you.
So let's pick up where I left off. As you told Gary Nathan in a great interview for Defector, you didn't think you were getting into qualifying, but you'd left a bunch of your tennis rackets at the tournament site and you needed to go pick them up. So what happened next?
So what happened next was, I showed up to Delray Sunday morning and, I thought I would go down there and maybe get a hit in with one of the guys who was actually in the tournament. And I bumped into the supervisor of the tournament and he says, "Hey, Matija, good thing that you're here. There's one guy that might potentially be pulling out, but it's still not certain yet." And, 10 minutes before the first match went on, he confirms with me that that the guy's pulling out and that I'm going to be taking his spot. So without a lot of time to get ready, I was thrown into the first match, and that's how I got my spot in the tournament. So.
And you won that first match, and you won another match, and you got into the main draw. And what happened next?
Yeah, so, I think people put a lot of emphasis on the Jack Sock match. It was not easy to beat. Stefan Kozlov, who was close to top 100 in the world. He beat Dimitrov last year at the Acapulco Open. Then next round, I played two-time Grand Slam quarterfinalist Tennis Sangren, by no means an easy match either. Then I got drawn to play Jack Sock. And, it was a center court match. I was obviously excited to be in the tournament, especially because it was my first ATP main draw match, because I had been playing the Challenger circuit. And I played the Grand Slams, but never an ATP main draw match. So that was pretty exciting for me. And, I come out, play against Jack Sock. His first serve of the match is 137. And I said, I looked around at the shotgun. I said, "Oh boy, this is going to be a tough night." And obviously Jack Sock's not, currently in the top 10, but this is a former top 10 guy, three-time Grand Slam winner in doubles, Olympic gold medalist, winner of a bunch of, he won the Paris Masters. So I'm obviously not going into the match saying I'm the favorite here. But I said, you know what? Look, it's an interesting matchup. I'm lefty, and let's see what happens. So first point of the match, 137. I said, oh gosh, and I was down 4-0 in the first set, and I could see a few faces in the crowd were saying, okay, this, nice try. This was a fun experience. Somehow I turned that match around and ended up winning the next two sets, 6-2, 6-2, and then it became really fun.
So the stories that came out after that match really emphasized the fact that you have a job, that you have a full-time job. And the stories were like, he had to ask for time off from his boss to play in the tournament. Like, that really made it seem like you were some working stiff slob guy who like really, but I feel like that's kind of a misrepresentation of what happened here. And I feel like your story is a story about when a professional athlete, which you are, knows when it's time to quit or when it's time to stop trying. Because you had a very, very successful tennis career and you had a couple of things happen to you. Injury, you had COVID happen. And so you made a decision at a certain point that it makes sense to go to business school or makes sense to get a job, which is a decision point that every athlete, except for, Tom Brady, I guess, has to make at a certain point is when is it time to take this dream that I have and a dream that I think maybe I'm still good enough, but when practically speaking, does it make sense to stop? That's something you've had to wrestle with.
That's spot on. I mean, especially, I think the story's been covered enough in the press that, tennis players, aside from the top 100 or even the top 50, hard for them to make a living. The expenses are so high. You're really like a young startup that's bleeding cash, trying to break into that upper echelon of the game where you actually start making money. And, unlike sports teams where you're signed to a team and the team covers the expenses of the coaching and the travel, as a tennis player, you're responsible for all the costs. So, if you want to coach, you pay your salary, you pay his expenses. If you want a physio, then you're paying for two people. You obviously pay for your own expenses too. So that story's been covered. But to your point, yeah, a lot of athletes that don't reach the top of their sports have to face this decision sometime or another. And for me, the first time around, it was because of an injury and a staph infection. Second time, I was my second comeback was cut short because of COVID, and you're faced with these decision points. It's like, how much shelf life do I have left? Am I making this a career, or is it better to start exploring other options? And, a lot of athletes that were in similar positions since this Delray Beach tournament have reached out to me on LinkedIn or in other ways to discuss my thought process around, walking away from a sport in which they're good, but maybe not world class or top 50 or top 20. Thinking about the next step and how to make that pivot.
Part of it is that the window for doing what professional athletes or accomplished athletes do is so small. You're only gifted with this physical capability for a limited period of time. And some athletes, and I like to think of like minor league baseball players who go into their 30s, who know that they're not going to make the show, and yet they do it because they love to do it. They play independent baseball, or they just keep going because they feel like this is fun and I'm making enough money that I can sort of squeeze by on a month-to-month basis. The tug of war in my head has always been between that, the sort of like, I don't want to give up I don't want to relinquish this skill that I've developed and worked so hard at before it's time, even if it means giving up on other things. I mean, did you sort of struggle with that, particularly in the last round? Like, you're getting into your early 30s and COVID and deciding that, I just got to move on here. But you didn't. You kept training, and I think that's the tug of war that you have.
Yeah, the fact that I kept training is, a function of, which I think a lot of athletes experience, is, you have this love of the game, love of the sport, and, it becomes a part of you. Like, when you're an athlete in your early 30s, that probably means you've been playing the sport that you're playing for, almost 30 years, and it becomes part of your DNA. So that part's hard to walk away from and just say, okay, let me just start wearing a suit to work every day and put that part of my life away. But I certainly dealt with that, especially during COVID, especially when there was nothing going on, no tournaments. I was 31, just coming out of business school, and really had a lot of time to think and reflect on what the next stage would be. Now, the interesting thing about getting into the business world is as time progresses, you pick up experience and wisdom, and you're able to carry that into your next deal. And, you have a 3 or 4 decade runway. And the irony in sports is as you become wiser and more experienced, your body, not immediately, but your body starts sort of, not being at its peak. You're certainly not as strong as you are maybe in your 20s, although some athletes are defying that at that now. But, in general, that's sort of the dynamic. It wasn't easy, and I feel like, this is a last run for me in terms of my tennis career. But, for folks thinking about doing this in the business world, the benefit is, you have a lot of years ahead of you to develop and pick up on those experiences and keep compounding. In tennis, you keep compounding until you retire, and then you literally fall off a cliff, and there's no more compounding. So,
so you had the experience in your tennis life and career of playing with and against guys that you beat, who then went on to great success. I'm thinking of people like Matteo Berrettini or Aslan Karatsev. You mentioned Tennis Sandgren. And it's a very kind of empirical business, right? There's a score, and you've played against these guys, and you stood across the net from them, and you beat them. And so you know that you have the ability on certain days, maybe certain months or certain years, to be at or near the top of the sport. And so I'm wondering, A, is that hard to watch other people that you have been at the same level with or better than kind of get to the point that you wanted to be at? And I guess B, how many people do you think are there like you who have the ability to be near the top, but due to circumstance or finances or other things weren't able to get there? How much of it is talent and how much is opportunity?
I think there's a big group of guys, not just in my sport, but the differences are so tiny. Past a certain point, the differences aren't even physical. You go to a challenger tour and you watch a guy who's, 280 in the world, and he can serve 135. He can serve 140. So at that point, it becomes more of a mental challenge. And do you believe that the work you're doing is enough? And a lot of this comes down to belief and not physical ability. I think there's a lot of guys and girls in my position. And your question was, was this hard? I don't view it as hard. I'm a fan of the game. I'm a fan of seeing other people do well. I think, the global pie is big enough to where everyone can have their moment of success. So when I see, Berrettini playing the finals of Wimbledon, sure, a part of me says, gosh, I beat this guy 2 years before that. Maybe I could do that, but it's not hard. I'm excited for these guys. They write great stories in our sport. When Karatsev made the semis of the Australian Open, I was thrilled because it's like, this is what the sport is about, defying odds, rooting for the underdog and just being part of cool stories. So as a fan, I love it. Yeah.
You were a little bit envious. Come on.
No, really. Well, there are enough tournaments in the year where everyone can, have their moments.
You said, the stories, and your story is really unusual. And I think even compared to other tennis players, I mean, you went to high school in Malta. You randomly sent...
Come on, Stefan. Every tennis player went to high school in Malta.
I looked up Maltese tennis players on Wiki. There were no men listed and 3 women listed, and none of whom was sort of above 900th in the world.
Yeah.
You sent a DVD to a bunch of schools, and Princeton wrote back for some reason because you weren't a highly rated junior player. You end up doing incredibly well in the Ivy League and in college tennis. How much of that is sort of overcoming the lack of the traditional upbringing? It's not like you were at the Bollettieri Academy, and how much of that is sort of being determined?
Yeah. It's, I only know that route in terms of, I only know my own path to get to where I did. Sure, it's not traditional, but I think it's because of those experiences that I've been able to get the next challenge, accomplished. It's because I didn't go to one of these academies, or because I wasn't, a typical sort of junior player that had, the coaches and the tournament schedule. I mean, I really played tennis locally in Malta, till I was about 18 with a few, I think I must have played 5 junior tournaments sort of internationally, and that was only in Croatia when I was there over the summer. The irony is there were 2 tennis players when I was growing up, and I was the second best player in the country. So since there were only 2 of us, I was the worst ranked guy in the country. But I think it's a little bit of everything, right? It's a little bit of serendipity, right place at the right time. It's definitely persistence because, I made 200 copies of this DVD and video. I sent a DVD. I uploaded the video to YouTube when this was like 2007, before people were getting discovered off of YouTube. And I just found creative ways to engage with people, give myself opportunities, and for someone to take a shot at me. And I was lucky that Glenn Michibata, who was the Princeton head coach at the time, didn't throw my video in the trash and said, who the hell is this guy? And
how did you do against the University of Pennsylvania when you were in college?
I went to Penn. That's why Josh is kneeling
you guys
here.
are Penn guys?
I'm a Penn guy.
I'm a Brown guy. I'm sure you kicked their ass too.
Never lost a match to either.
What did I say on the show last week, Josh? We were talking about the men's basketball team and the women's basketball team.
What a run
week.
Princeton has had, right?
This
has
one of
been
the
a
things
good
I
month.
said is that Princeton does a better job than other Ivies in recruiting aggressively and creatively, and I think you'd fall into the creative category.
Yeah, certainly into the creative category. I mean, it's atypical, but Glenn took a shot at entertaining a conversation with me. So that's the serendipity part, and then the persistence part is, it's not like we had one conversation and he said, "Oh my God, you're the greatest thing that's ever come across my radar." It took me about, I'd say, 10 months to get him to say yes. So this was a long courtship. As opposed to like love at first sight. And boy, am I glad he said yes eventually.
So picking up your story at Delray, you lost in the next round to Marcos Giron. He's an American player. Mm-hmm. And the really interesting thing that I'd love for you to talk about is you're on this high, you're playing really well, you're getting all of this attention. And then I'm looking at the draws for, ATP qualifying, for challengers, for whatever. You haven't been playing. You haven't been playing these tournaments. So, but you're also not going back to your job full time. So talk about how you decided to kind of capitalize on this run that you have and strategize about what will, I think, probably be you're 33, the kind of last big push of your tennis career.
Yeah. So after Delray, the short term, I guess, impulse would be, oh my God, let me just ask for wild cards everywhere and just keep playing immediately. And then I said, okay, better take a step back, process everything that's happened, get really fit, and then, start working my way up. Smaller tournaments, and then, let's see how I'm playing in the summer. I got a pretty bad news about a week after Delray. My granddad passed away, and I flew to Serbia, spent 10 days with my family there. Death is never easy. No, none of us are going to avoid it at some point, but that was a pretty difficult moment after Delray, and it just goes to show you, life is so unpredictable. You can go from a high to a low pretty quickly, and that, definitely keeps you humble. And so, I spent a week with family there, 10 days, attended the funeral, trying to draw from a lot of memories. I was very close with him. So that's sort of why you haven't seen me playing. But I do intend to start. I'm going to, like Houston ATP 250, they were kind enough to give me a wild card into the qualifying. And that's important because this is a tournament in the US. I play for Croatia. I'm not some, crazy standout junior. I'm not signed with some big agency, and they still decided to offer me a wild card, which is a big thing. And, just grateful to them, grateful for the opportunity. I have no idea how I'll do. It's going to be on red clay in Houston, but that's my next shot. And after that, I plan on playing smaller tournaments, the futures and the challengers and really getting my ranking back up so I can be ready for the bigger tournaments.
And I'm really sorry to hear about your grandfather. And that's just an example on a smaller scale of the things that we don't see as fans or people that follow the sport that affect you, right? And so I am sorry to hear about that. And the Houston thing will be kind of a big opportunity. How do you not put too much pressure on yourself to think about this is my, chance to get a lot of points or to really capitalize on this?
The way I take pressure off is I say, sure, now, maybe there's an added element of expectation or, oh my God, what if it doesn't go as well as you planned? But I always think of someone like Roger Federer serving for Wimbledon with 2 matches and not winning the match. Like that's disappointment. And then if you really want to put things into perspective, you think about people with real struggle and real pressure. And at the end of the day, I'm old enough now to view this as a game, as a privilege. I'm healthy. I get to, travel and be surrounded by super interesting people. It's a great continuation of the story. So there's no, real pressure. I think serving out Wimbledon with 2 match points is, that's real pressure and that's real disappointment if you don't come out as the winner. But no, I'm excited. I hope to give my best performance there. I'm excited to see the draw on Friday. And, what happens, happens. That's the approach you have to have in sports. If you want it too much, and Rafa used to say this, he goes, losing is not my enemy. Fear of losing is my enemy. And I think that's so true, not just for sports, but for a lot of things in life. It's like if you fear something too much, you got to learn how to control that and use it in your favor. So, I'm playing to win. Great opportunity. If I win, great. If I don't win, great. There'll be other tournaments, and that's it.
And there'll be a day job for you on Monday if you want it, if you need it.
Yeah, Monday day job is always there. So
we hope that you're successful enough to experience Roger Federer levels of disappointment one day in your career. Matija Pecotic, thanks so much for coming on the show, and best of luck in Houston and beyond.
Thanks, guys. Enjoyed chatting with you. Take care.
All right, we recorded that conversation with Matija Pecotic at the end of last week. And after we stopped recording, I told him about this match I'd watched at the Miami Open between Frances Tiafoe and Yosuke Watanuki, one that I thought exemplified the small margins in the sport. Watanuki, who usually plays in tennis's minor leagues, had outplayed Tiafoe for most of the match, but just barely lost at the end. Maybe it was mental, maybe it was physical, but such small margins in tennis. Anyway, when I was talking about that, Matija reminded me that he'd made it into the Delray Beach Open, his moment of great triumph, because Yosuke Watanuki had pulled out of the Delray Beach Open. So then, crazily enough, the qualifying draw comes out for the Houston event that Matija was just telling us about, and there's the first round match, Matija Pecotic versus Yosuke Watanuki. They played on Saturday. It was a really tight match. Matija lost in straight sets, 7-6 first set tiebreak, 6-4 in the second set. Matija is currently ranked number 580 in the world and will be keeping track of his progress for as long as he keeps playing. Up next, Jody Avirgan on his podcast Good Sport and sports television debates, how they're bad for America.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, when you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right now from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Like being Lee Murray, wanted to be world champion in the UFC.
He just happens to be involved in the largest cash robbery in the world.
He's definitely not sane.
Showtime Sports presents the unbelievable true story about the MMA fighter who pulled off one of the largest heists in history.
Huge amounts of money, armed gang, disguises, kidnapping.
This is the sort of thing you see in Hollywood films.
We've never seen that for real.
Catching Lightning, streaming Friday, April 7th, only on Showtime, streaming with Paramount Plus.
Jody Avirgan is a former producer for ESPN and a bunch of other radio and podcast outlets. He's hosting a new series for the TED Audio Collective called Good Sport. There are 7 episodes, each about a social, cultural, or scientific issue connected to sports. The hidden world of stadium deals, the truth about the zone, where do great athletes come from? I listened to a bunch of them. They're really good, including one titled, Pardon the Interruption, but Did Sports Debate Shows Change the World? And then, maybe to promote Jody's show, there was a kind of newsworthy debate about sports debates last week between former ESPN guy Dan Le Batard and current ESPN guy Stephen A. Smith. In this clip from Le Batard's podcast, he presses Stephen A. about what he and his former sports debate show partner Skip Bayless did to the world.
I hate what you two have done to sports television.
You can say that all you want to. I would say, who the hell are you to sit up there and say me and him? What about you? Where the hell were you? Living under a rock? Teaching at Miami U? You were a part of it too? You ain't innocent.
I'm talking about all the imitators that you have birthed. All of the imitators that are all over the place thinking without the journalism credentials that the point of all this is to turn it into an argument on television.
Jody Avirgan is here now. Welcome to the show. I'm not going to yell.
No yelling. I love Stephen A. Can't help be Stephen A. Who the hell are you? Right? Don't even address the question. Just turn it back around. Make it personal. And yes, that is what Stephen A. has wrought. But anyway, thank you for inviting me back to a much more civilized, journalistic, productive sports talk space.
We'll get to that. Before we debate the debate about debates, Jody, tell us what inspired you to make this episode.
Well, the whole series Good Sport is like each episode sort of comes from just like a little curiosity I've always had from sports. I mean, it's very different from the show I hosted, 30 for 30, which was much more, as people know, historical stories. And it was less about ideas and it was more about, let's just tell a great story that feels like it has, some resonance or some bigger themes to explore. But with Good Sport is, it's TED. I talked to the TED folks. I was like, what do you want this show to be about? And they were like, ideas. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So, we started from there, like often little curiosities that then, as we started to make the series, I think felt like they connected to bigger ideas. But one of the questions I've had in my head for a long time, because I've covered politics as well, and I've covered sports. I've covered, like the two of you, I've covered a lot of worlds. And I have started to notice that the way that people talk in politics feels pretty resonant to the way that people talk on sports radio. And I even started to notice when I was covering the 2016 election, people were using phrases like my team, their team, and just that sort of language of like, how do I gin up divisiveness? How do I, just make it personal as quickly as possible? Just sort of because you root for the other team or remember the other team, the starting premise is you're an idiot and you're wrong. And then we can go from there. And that sounds a lot like the worst kinds of sports talk. And so the episode that we did sort of goes down that path and looks at both how there is an actual kind of connection between sports talk and political talk, but moreover how the discourse writ large seems to be coarsening in the way that sports talk, I wouldn't say we put it at the feet of sports talk as the root cause, but certainly through that you can see a lot of the ways in which we've become less and less productive in the way we talk to each other.
So the origins of this podcast, we started in 2010 The idea was to do something different from sports talk radio.
Yeah.
The title obviously is a play on a sports talk radio trope. You mentioned sports radio in your little riff there, Jody. And Stephen A., you made a fair point about him making it personal, getting defensive, pushing back, not really getting at the substance. But he did make some reasonable points, both in that Levitard podcast and on his own show, of why are you focusing on me and why are you not talking about Jim Rome? Why are you not talking about PTI? And you do talk about PTI extensively on your podcast, I should say. But I do think that's a good question. Like, why has Stephen A. Smith become the focus of this when he didn't actually start any of this? We were reacting to AM Sports Radio, which has its own tropes that I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. And there's also, Stefan, I don't know if going back to when you were listening to sports talk, in the 70s or whatever, when you were a kid, was all
the 40s, right?
Yeah. Was all of this stuff familiar to you?
Yeah,
from
the 70s.
back then?
Absolutely. I grew up outside of New York City. I used to listen to John Sterling, who became much more famous as the Yankees play-by-play guy. But in the 70s, he hosted Sports Talk Radio. He helped, I think, create the format. He took calls. He yelled at callers. He hung up on them. He ridiculed people. That was the format almost 50 years ago.
And there's also a Howard Cosell
sure
contributed to this too, right?
Absolutely. The bombast.
I mean, I think the key in that exchange that we just played, and I think it's where Lebitard is right, is he says, it's not about you, it's about all the imitators. And that's really where we landed in our episode, where we actually I think we briefly name-checked Stephen A., but Josh, to your point, like, we didn't make our episode about Stephen A. because I actually love Stephen A. I think he's really smart. And I usually think like he's got a lot of light, but there's also a lot of heat there too. I think he's pretty genuine. And in our episode, we call it the sort of the carbon copy of the carbon copy of the carbon copy. And that's the problem, where you get the people who think they can be Stephen A., who imitate all of the sort of surface things, but don't have, Lebitard put it as journalistic integrity, or journalistic background. I would put it as more kind of like humility or respect for the person you're talking to, or sort of like an openness to new ideas. And I think the problem is that the incentive structures within the format and the industry point you towards the most shallow sort of carbon copy of Stephen A. And so to actually have integrity and to actually be thoughtful in the way that Stephen A. is, and I think that PTI is actually you're sort of kind of fighting against all of the ways that the system has been set up to probably push you towards something much coarser.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where I ended up.
But it's the formula that pushes it that direction too.
Yeah.
And as much preparation as Stephen A. does, and recall Vincent Cunningham, our sometimes guest host, wrote an amazing profile of Stephen A. and his work ethic and how he does what he does. But the formula is what drives all of this. It's to take a simple question or an observation or a discussion point and light it on fire, and repeat it and talk loudly about it. And to, as you and Katie Nolan on your podcast do, sort of break down the way it works. And I want to talk about that a little bit. How did Katie explain to you what the process is for creating takes like these over and over again and turning them into shouting fests?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the sort of funner parts of doing this episode. And we kind of wanted to start there with, can Katie train me to be a hot take artist, to channel my inner Stephen A.? And Katie is someone who, as I put in the show, is, I'm like 4 degrees removed from that world, maybe more. And Katie has like stared into the abyss. She's never gone full Stephen A., but she certainly has had to play that game a little bit and is aware of it. So she was a great guide to that. And our goal for the episode was to sort of have it start there and be fun and so forth. And then hopefully just like before people even realized, have the episode expand to be about something, I think, deeper and bigger, and bring in politics and sort of larger questions of how we talk to each other and so forth. But, it was very fun to kind of get the breakdown of how you go on TV and be, one of these shout guys from Katie. And a lot of it is, you pick a phrase that they said and you repeat it over and over. You take a word like preposterous and you say it over and over. You don't really need to listen to what the other person is saying. You're more listening for something to pick up and sort of drive a wedge into. Katie pointed out, like, stats are only there if they help your argument, but otherwise they don't really need to be part of the picture. And, if you're on TV, how do you gesticulate? How do you make faces? How do you listen? You see this all the time. This was something I didn't really fully say in the episode, but I have folks who I really like and admire who've ended up at ESPN, and I've seen them kind of like follow that path, and whether they do it consciously or not, you start to see them and you look up on TV and they're like doing that gesticulating, they're doing that yelling, they're doing that escalation. And, these are people who I know are like really thoughtful and I would love to have a long, deep conversation. But again, like the siren song of what happens when they put you on TV. I love JJ Redick. I think he's really good. He is walking a very fine line right now when he goes on First Take. And, sometimes he's positioned himself really nicely as kind of the more reasonable voice, but he still knows how to make a crazy face or, repeat a phrase or do all those things. So you can just kind of see it over and over.
So the JJ Redick, you mentioned, he was a part of one of these recent debates on ESPN that was started with a comment that Kendrick Perkins made. And we actually have a clip of that.
When it comes down to guys winning MVP since 1990, it's only 3 guys that won the MVP that wasn't top 10 in scoring. Do you know who those 3 guys were?
Who were they?
Steve Nash, Jokic, and Dirk Nowitzki. No.
Dirk Nowitzki.
What do those guys have in common? I'll let it sit there and marinate. You think about it.
They're white guys is what they have in common. And the other guy in the conversation there was Stephen A. Smith. So JJ Redick pushed back on it, and it was a news cycle for days on ESPN. It was content generated by ESPN that led to more content on ESPN, but it's also percolated outwards. We've considered talking about it on this show. We haven't done a segment on it, but we might have. It's been segment on other podcasts, on other shows. And that, I think, is what ESPN is looking for, this like kind of vertically integrated argumentation where it starts on one show and goes from another show to another show to another show. But I would say this, the way that Kendrick Perkins said it originally, he didn't get into details. He didn't get into like super in depth about, the different arguments were on both sides, but talking about whether race affects MVP votes or perceptions of how good people are at basketball is a super fascinating topic. And the initial hot take there has led to some super interesting conversations, I think, on ESPN as well as elsewhere. And I think, I don't know, Jody, like maybe on your episode, did you consider having somebody push back a little bit? Because you and Katie are kind of the same mind. You talked to James Andrew Miller, who's a really smart guy, about the history of this stuff. And you guys seem to be kind of the same mind. And me and Stefan are often of the same mind of things. And I think it can be a weakness of this show. It's like can be difficult to make agreement seem interesting. And so would our show benefit from more disagreement? It's interesting and when we do disagree, I think people are interested in that and drawn to it.
Yeah. First off, tried to book Stephen A. for that episode. Didn't happen. If you got an in, let me know. And so I'm glad that Levitard kind of asked the question that I would have asked. And then the vertical integration worked its way down to this very segment that we're doing right now. But no, I hope that it comes across in our episode that I do think like there's a lot of good that can come from argument and disagreement. And these are complicated things. And the whole premise of my show is that like sports is a really great lens through which to try and understand the world. And like to do that, the world is complicated and messy and you need to make points. You need to talk to people you disagree with and so forth. So, I don't try and land on any big conclusions. And I hopefully kind of am willing to push back on myself. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think that we should be confronted with opposing ideas. It's fun to argue. It is just a matter of degrees and it's a matter of execution. It's not like, abolish all sports talk. No, it's just how do you pull it off?
it's a feeling that it's a work, right? Like, and the thing that is an antecedent for all of this is professional wrestling. I mean, that's been talked about ad nauseum with Trump. Obviously, Josie Reisman has this book that just came out about Vince McMahon called Ringmaster that's about all of this stuff. And I think Skip Bayless, Stefan, is like the leading practitioner of this with his years-long kind of tirades against LeBron and the clutch gene, where it just seems not genuine, where you look like it's somebody who is performing, is like playing the role of a heel. But like that's what Skip did when he was at the Dallas Morning News. I mean, he was a heel as a columnist too. But like, I think I don't enjoy watching things that I feel like are fake, but I think in the history of entertainment, whether it's pro wrestling or anything else, there are villains, and he, I think, likes to and has profited from playing this role of being a villain on television.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And, you know, there's a reason that this podcast, Josh, doesn't have 1 million downloads a week. It's because partly we don't scream at each other. And we don't have arguments.
Say it one more time, Josh.
That information I'm giving that confidential
That information is
away.
Proprietary.
Yeah.
We have 2 million.
But, you know, one thing here, and our episode does this, but you mentioned James Andrew Miller, who, you know, I think is thoughtful about this stuff. And I talked to him about but some of the history of how sports talk got to this place, but also how it's starting to bleed into the rest of the discourse. And I mean, he made some really, you know, I think worthwhile points about how when you start to see this stuff pop up in particular the realm of politics, it does mean something different, you know? And it is, as much as I think sports matter, I understand that the stakes in sports, you can mouth off in sports, but, you know, the stakes in politics are different, and they should be different, and you should treat them differently. And so a big part of this is when you poured over the kind of style of how we talk in sports into the world of politics. And obviously Trump embraced a lot of that. Conservative talk radios embraced a lot of that. We didn't get into it in the episode, but I mean, you know, the Barstool thing, how Barstool's basically been like, you know what? I was arguing about the Red Sox, and I'm just going to do the same thing about COVID or, you know, PPP or Trump or whatever. And I mean, that is really, really, really corrosive.
And I think that it's not, I don't know that sports is the progenitor of all this. I mean, go back to 2004 with Jon Stewart taking down Tucker Carlson on CNN's Crossfire and calling him a dick and saying, stop hurting America. I mean, that seems quaint now. Go back to the 70s again. You know, Saturday Night Live had a running skit in which Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin pretended to be opposing debaters in the sort of the early type of political debate shows. And, you know, Dan Aykroyd would say, "Jane, you ignorant slut," which became a very famous catchphrase.
Thank you for educating our younger listeners.
Yes. So
Saturday Night Live was a show that was one fairly popular and influential in the culture.
So it's not like this is new, but it feels like it's all been elevated to an art form now. I mean, you know, as you and Katie discussed, there is a process by which someone like Stephen A. and Skip Bayless get into character, and there is a process for how these arguments are structured on these shows. There is very little that is genuine about it, except I do think that someone like Stephen A. is one of those weird people that does have opinions about everything and prepares to articulate them, but he actually wants to have these opinions. It exhausts me, but there are people out there that, you know, are sort of polymathic about their own world and are willing to take stands on things.
Is there an argument, Jody, that you are, not you, Jody, but we, the royal we, that we are underestimating the intelligence of the audience here? Like, that people know what they're watching and can deduce what, you know, that it's entertainment, and that people don't have to be coming from a place of genuine outrage for you to enjoy them saying that they're outraged. And Stephen A. is a brilliant speaker and elocutionist, whatever, the rhetorician, whatever the words that he would have command of that I do not. And you can enjoy watching him perform. And it's not even necessarily about what he says. It's about how he says it. Why can't people just enjoy that?
Well, and then on top of that, Jody, shouldn't the Stephen A. part just be okay, right? I mean, it is more dangerous when it's Tucker Carlson or something that has actual consequences for a lot of people. Maybe we are too, maybe we care too much that Stephen A. yells on
Maybe we're
television.
overthinking it? Is that what you're implying on Slate's Hang Up and Listen? Look, I think, sure, yes, Josh, there is an argument that people are smarter than we give them credit for. I think I'm giving people credit, but I don't know. Look around. Does it feel like people are taking this with a nuance? Does it feel like things are getting more nuanced? Does it feel like conversations are getting more productive? It just feels broken in some fundamental way, and it feels more and more broken. And there's no simple, you don't put it at the feet of one place. But I do think that we're learning lessons about how to talk to each other, and it feels good to talk to each other in a certain kind of way. And there's all sorts of incentives to talk to each other in a kind of way that I do feel is corrosive and not productive. And so whether people kind of recognize that they're doing that or not, that's, I think, actually one of the more insidious things that's been happening is this blurring of lines between, I'm just mouthing off, and I know I'm just mouthing off, but then at some point it becomes serious and it becomes real. And I feel like, that's one of the things that the modern right has embraced. This idea is it's just a joke, it's just a joke, it's just a joke, until it's not a joke, until it's then having real world effects. And so we just have to think a little more deeply about where that line is and how we kind of use our platforms and take on that responsibility.
Preposterous.
Yeah, preposterous.
Jody Avirgan is the host, producer, other things on the new TED Audio Collective series, Good Sport. We'll post a link to the podcast on our show page. Jody, thanks so much for coming on this show.
Thanks to you.
As if the McCrispy couldn't get any better, Bacon and Ranch just entered the chat. The Bacon Ranch McCrispy, available at participating McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, nature's great energy builder. It is endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says, it was okay. In Sunday's women's NCAA final, LSU needed someone to come off the bench to guard Caitlin Clark when most of the starters got in foul trouble in the first half. The woman who drew the assignment was a junior college transfer. She made 2 3-pointers and drew an offensive foul on Caitlin Clark. Josh mentioned her in our conversation with Sabrina. Her name is Last Tier Poa. That's LAST-TEAR. Last name Poa. She's from Melbourne, Australia. She is of Polynesian heritage. According to a feature by Jan Risher in The Advocate, her given name pays homage to her great-grandmother. Poa never met her great-grandmother, who died just before she was born, shedding one last tear from her left eye before her death. And Poa says, I have a beauty mark just beneath my left eye in the same spot where my great-grandmother's tear fell. That's really lovely. Poa, who was the MVP of last year's National Junior College Tournament at Northwest Florida State College, has siblings named Heavenly and Kingston, and her pregame tradition is to call them while eating chicken Alfredo that she prepares herself. Pretty good pregame tradition, Josh, as pregame traditions go. Josh, what is your last tier Poa?
If you've been listening to the show for a long time, or if you've just listened once but made it all the way to the end, you know that I always say, remember Zelmo Beaty? It's been a while since we talked about why, so here's a refresher if you've heard it before, or here's an introduction if you've never heard the story. Zelmo Beaty was born in the small town of Hilster, Texas in 1939. He won 2 state basketball championships in high school, then went on to star at the historically black college Prairie View A&M, also in Texas. Big Z got drafted by the St. Louis Hawks with the number 3 overall pick in the 1962 NBA draft. He did well in the NBA. He made 2 All-Star games, but then he left for the ABA in 1969. It was in that rival league that he really made his name. He led his Utah Stars to the 1971 ABA title, and he got named the MVP of the ABA playoffs that year. As Stefan wrote in his wonderful obituary for Zelmo in 2013, his most important victories, though, were won off the court. He was a hugely important racial trailblazer in the state of Utah. He was also the president of the ABA Players Association, fighting to get retired players better pensions. 2 years before Zelmo died back in 2011, we had another former ABA player on this podcast. His name is Zaid Abdul Aziz, and he was one of the subjects of a 1968 Sports Illustrated series called The Black Athlete, A Shameful Story. Zaid Abdul Aziz told us that it upset him when Shaquille O'Neal told David Letterman in an interview that he had never heard of Zelmo Beaty, given everything that Zelmo had done to pave the way for the sport of basketball and basketball players. And so that is why we say, remember Zelmo Beaty. It hardens me to report that Zelmo is getting remembered a lot these days. Most notably, in 2016, he was elected to the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. But there's more, as listener Jerry Milani pointed out to us in an email last week. Starting 2 years ago, College Insider started giving out 5 different named awards named after legendary players from historically Black colleges. Willis Reed, who just died recently, Cleo Hill, Marcus Haynes, Travis Grant, and Zelmo Beaty. The Zelmo Beaty Award goes to the player with the most total block shots in all divisions of college basketball. The first award went to Walker Kessler, who's now in the NBA for the Utah Jazz. This year, it went to 2 players, Jamarian Sharp of Western Kentucky and Jarnell Rancy of Caldwell University, each of whom had exactly 131 blocks. Congratulations to both of these Zelmo Beaty Award winners. The College Insider Awards are given out by a group that is called Eracism Forever. It was founded in 2020 and has as one of its goals to educate today's fans on the stars of the past. So a group that shares our mission. Eracism Forever didn't just name an award after Zelmo Beaty. They also have staged a Zelmo Beaty game, which was part of a postseason tournament in 2022 called the Basketball Classic. In that game in 2022, Coastal Carolina beat Maryland Eastern Shore. So, Stefan, great to see all of this Zelmo remembering in all sincerity. And I was just looking back at the obit you wrote this morning. We'll link to it in our show notes. What a great guy, Zelmo Beaty. And I continue to, be glad that we had Zaid Abdul Aziz on our show, that he prodded us and prodded, I think, a lot of people to think about both Zelmo Beaty specifically and people like him, forebears of these sports that we watch and care about and have changed so much thanks to a lot of Black athletes like Zelmo Beaty who deserve attention, praise, and remembrance.
And also remember how delightful it was when we had Zelmo's widow on the show and how much she appreciated the little thing that we do, just recognizing and remembering Zelmo. It's one of the great things that we came up with, honestly, on this program. And to see that sort of love for, like you said, Zelmo and other pioneering Black athletes is a wonderful thing.
That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. Listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out. Go to slate.com/hangup and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levine. You want to do it, Stefan?
Remember Zelmo Beaty.
Thanks for listening.